Excellent. All right.
That worked. I don't know
Agenda.
what that is.
And we hear you now. Just so you know. And you're not muted.
Oh my God.
But we do hear you. All righty. Welcome, everyone. I am going to go ahead and call the Community Development Commission meeting for July 19th, 2023 to order at 3:37 p.m. and
Why
let's
is this
start
thing?
with a roll call.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, Villarreal,
Present.
Commissioner Kenny Geyer,
Present.
Commissioner Brott. You're muted, sir.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Padilla,
Present.
Commissioner Torres,
Present.
Commissioner Watkins,
We hear you.
thank you.
Maybe
And
not.
Commissioner Hughes.
Commissioner Hughes. We don't hear you, Commissioner Hughes. Fun tech issues. I don't hear you, Ken. But we see you.
Here.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, we have a quorum. Moving on to the next item, which is approval of the agenda. And are there any changes from staff?
No changes from staff, Madam Chair.
Okay. Any changes from the commission? Hearing none. Can I get a motion?
I move we approve the June minutes.
All right.
Move for approval of the agenda as noted.
So we have a
Open
motion
agenda.
from Commissioner Kenny Geyer, and we need a second.
I move to second the approval of the agenda.
Madam Chair, the motion was for the minutes. not
So
the-
yeah, I'm sorry. I was getting ahead of myself because
Oh.
I'm so eager. I
I
move that we approve the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. And we get a second from Commissioner Brott.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, any other discussion? Tony, can you do a roll call, please?
Chair Villarreal,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenny Geyer,
Yes.
Commissioner Brott,
Yes.
Commissioner Padilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins.
Is hear me?
Yes. Kind of.
Sorry.
All right, so that was approval of the agenda. Now the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on June 21st, 2023. Any changes from staff?
No changes from staff, Madam Chair.
All right, any changes from any of the commissioners? Seeing none. Commissioner Torres, you have your hand up?
Yes, I think on page 5, where the numbers are listed, I think it shouldn't have a dollar sign on there. I think it's just it should be just the numbers. It's page 5. It's like 10,000 something, 4,000 something, 5,000 something. I don't think it should have a money sign. I think it's just straight numbers.
Page 5, so at the top it said. Can you read that section again so that Tony knows where it's located?
Yeah, hold on, let me find it on the phone.
It's the only numbers I see on that page, on page 5. It says Alexandra Ladd confirmed the total not subject to inclusion is 4,895. If you subtract this from 10,362, you get the 5,467.
I think that's what I'm referring to, but I thought that was in terms of numbers of not dollars, but rather units or
Hmm.
That's how I understood it, if I remember correctly from the meeting.
Yeah, I feel like it was numbers, not amounts. So you're right.
Yes.
Commissioner Todes, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Change noted. Any other changes? Edits from the commissioners? All right, so since we just amended, we'll need a motion to approve as amended.
I move to
I
approve,
move-
Commissioner Todes, go ahead.
I move to approve the minutes as amended.
Wait,
Second,
we got a second. All right, any
And
other
good catch.
discussion? Thank you. Tony, can we get a roll call, please?
Yes, Chair Villarreal,
Yes.
Commissioner Kenny Guyer,
yes.
Commissioner Brott,
Yes.
Commissioner Padilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
Yes,
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes.
Commissioner Watkins.
Still can't hear. Go ahead, Commissioner Watkins. Can we hear you now?
So I said yes.
You have really bad connection, so we actually can't hear you.
Well,
But I'm glad you can hear us, hopefully. So we'll go ahead, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item on the agenda. So the minutes are approved and we'll go on to item 5, which is discussion agenda. It's consideration of bill number 2023-23. It's a bill creating Article 18-18, the high-end excise tax for affordable housing ordinance, establishing an excise tax on the transfer of certain residential property and dedicating the revenues to affordable housing. We have a few folks here, but I just wanted to thank you all for making time. I know when we were deciding whether or not to have a July meeting, we didn't know if this item would be completed by this time period. So therefore we had initially canceled our July meeting. And when we were able to complete this ordinance, we then introduced it at the quality of life meeting at the beginning of July. So we put this back onto the agenda for CDC for this meeting. And so I appreciate you all making the time to adjust your schedules. I know that Alex is actually not in the state, so thank you, Alex, for joining us. I think what would be helpful, I don't know if everybody looked at the PowerPoint presentation. I think that was helpful when we presented that information to the public for the first public comment, and it cleared up some misconceptions about what this ordinance is requesting, which essentially will put it on the ballot. So the council's not voting on this, only to vote to put it on the ballot so that the public can vote for this measure. So I think it would be helpful first for Alex to give us that information, because I don't think all of you were at that meeting or may have not been part of the public comment period from last week's meeting. So I think Alex,
Yeah, should I go ahead and share screen and just run through the same presentation?
that would be
Okay.
great. Because it does apply to a lot of the work and details and data that we know of, those of us that have served on the CDC, but I think it just kind of reiterates the need for a consistent revenue source for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I think those of us that have served a while know that that's always a struggle for us to be able to, the requests that we get in are always way more than what we're able to allocate and recommend. So I think this also just kind of solidifies some of the data points. And I know there were some questions for more data. It was, we received it a little late, so I think there's ways to get some of that information later on if needed. So Alex, I don't know if is it working for you? There we go.
Yeah.
Excellent.
All right, so when we started talking about this, we figured we needed to start kind of at the basics. What's the purpose? Why would we do this? Whoops. And the purpose is to establish, and it should be another permanent and recurring funding stream to support affordable housing that is directly related to offsetting the impact of high real estate values. So I think that's really important when you look at policy and legislation. Is the legislation responding to the root cause of the problem? And I just, in my expert opinion, I think it is. So I'm very much in favor of this one. The issue here is that there will be a 3% tax on each real estate transfer, residential real estate transfer that's valued above 1 million. It only applies to the amount over 1 million. And another positive purpose is that it helps to diversify the revenue streams that we already have into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It just helps to create another source for that funding. Municipalities, this is going to come up. Our municipality, we do not have taxing authority on property values, but we can tax the transaction. So I think that's an important point to make. And as Councilor Villarreal said, the ordinance that the governing body will approve doesn't establish this. It puts it on the ballot in November for voters to consider and vote on. So a couple of particulars about the tax is that the revenues will be deposited into the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which all of you are very familiar with. It applies to the conveyance of ownership of real property in the city, residential. There's several exemptions. It's paid by the buyer. I think that's another point to make, and it's due at the time of transfer. It doesn't apply to the following, and this is not a complete list. This was what I thought were the most common situations that folks will come across. So any property that's already subject to an affordability restriction is not taxed. Any property that's conveyed to a unit of government, any transfer of property, that won't be taxed. Anything conveyed for an organization that's set up to an organization that's set up for charitable or religious purposes, a transfer of title or change in interest because of death, inheritance, decree of distribute, anything in that situation, family transfers. And then there's also an exemption for transfers that are part of forming an LLC or consolidation of corporate elements. And again, commercial property is exempted, undeveloped property is exempted, and then family transfers. And then what do we think the potential impact is? It only applies to the amount over 1 million, as I said. So a 1.5 million transaction pays 3% of the 500,000. And if in more simpler terms, perhaps for every 100,000 greater than 1 million, the tax generates $3,000. That's the basic math. We think that the tax will raise, and this is a pretty conservative average, but it's based on what's been happening in the market, 4.5 million in revenue per year. And that was based on, like I said, prior transactions. So another question we're getting is, well, what's the Affordable Housing Trust Fund? Because most people do not know it as well as all of you do. It was established by ordinance, so it's codified in the city code in 2007. After the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act created an exemption for affordable housing, so that the state's anti-donation clause does not apply if the uses of funds benefits affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Act and its rules, which were written by the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority, determine the eligible uses for the fund, the eligibility criteria for applicants, and the application requirements, funding requirements. So this isn't just something that the city made up. This is very, very well regulated. And all of this is codified in our code. So again, There's no like, nah, that's sort of inconvenient. Let's not do it that way this year. We have to do it the way that it is in our code. The New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority asks us to report the uses of these funds and any other donations that the city makes to benefit affordable housing. And that agency is the oversight, provides the oversight for the Affordable Housing Act. I think it's important that the basic intent of the fund is to increase and preserve the supply of affordable housing that's available to low and moderate income residents of Santa Fe. So it's very clear what that funding is used for. So eligible, again, it's allows the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act allows the city to donate, provide, or pay for the cost of the following: land, building, the costs of acquisition, development, construction, financing, or operating or owning affordable housing. So all those capital costs, the costs of financing or infrastructure that's necessary to support the production of affordable housing. Really important point: supportive services, administrative costs, other programming related expenses are not eligible uses. And then who is eligible to receive the benefit from the funds? For programs where there is an individual beneficiary, this person cannot earn more than 120% of the area median income, which is determined through the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD's approved income certification process and the area median income data. And I believe that the MFA is raising this limit, but I'm not sure the status on that. But that is something to consider, just because the cost of housing is outpacing even higher income earners across the state. It's not just Santa Fe anymore. Most of all of our applicants for the funds, so they're not necessarily the end beneficiaries, but all of our applicants for funds, and here's the eligible list. They can be a housing agency, a housing authority, corporation. They can be a for-profit organization. They just have to have a mission to support housing affordability. Most of our applicants are nonprofit organizations. We have really, well, as all of you know, because you look at this every year, we have really specific evaluation criteria. We want to see data. We want to see that there's a demonstration that the proposed use of funds is going to benefit the community, that there's a need for it. And we want to know that the applicant for funds has the experience, the organizational resources, and the financial feasibility to complete the project or activity. So this is not startup seed funding. Oh, let's throw some funding there and see if we can raise more funding. This is kind of last mile funding. You know, we want this funding to go into a project when it's already for sure going to happen. We're going to make it better. We're going to make it more effective. We're going to make it serve more people with these funds. And how do we manage it? The Community Development Commission, a resident-based advisory group, all of you guys, sets funding priorities every year. For 23-24, these include housing solutions for people experiencing homelessness or who are unsuitably precariously housed, those at risk of losing their housing either because of eviction, foreclosure, or safety and condition issues, or renters and homeowners experiencing severe cost burden. So we're really looking at, it is a range of needs. We know that we have people in our workforce who are living in cars. And so it's workforce housing. It's kind of a workforce housing takes all, looks differently than we might think. And we also know that we have folks who are experiencing extreme health and safety issues because they're living on the streets. As you all know, we release a request for applications every year. The applications are reviewed by the Community Development Commission, funding amounts recommended on how well these proposals meet the evaluation criteria. So again, we're not just picking our favorites and saying, oh, they're great, we're going to fund them. We're really basing these funding amounts on how well the criteria in our application are met. The governing body ultimately approves the funding allocations. And then my office, as all of you know, executes contracts and administers the uses of funds. Another big question we've had is, well, how are the funds really used over the last 3 years? These numbers do not include the fourth quarter of the current year because we're just finishing that up. But mortgage principal reduction over the years has been a big one. Recently, post-pandemic, like I just read that priority, we've been really focused on some very basic needs in addition to the mortgage principal reduction. So that's why foreclosure prevention, which isn't always part of the pie, and rental assistance which has been part of the pie for the last several years and has gotten bigger. New construction, rehab of rental, and it's important to note that these are 100% affordable projects that we've supported. Transitional housing, so this is sort of specialized short-term rental support. Affordable housing development, that's more of the horizontal costs of development, the infrastructure. And then the operations of Consuelo's Place, which 3.5 years ago didn't exist, but we used affordable housing trust funds to keep it going through the pandemic. And now we've shifted over to some other funds, but we were able to make sure that the folks staying there didn't lose their housing. I think another huge important point, and again, all of you are more familiar with this than anybody else, which is that we require that every dollar of affordable housing trust funds is matched by $3 of outside funding. So funding that it can be organizational resources, it can be philanthropic funds, it can be other state or federal public funds, it can be in-kind resources, it can be private debt, impact investments, but it just has to come from somewhere else. And again, to my earlier point, we want these funds to close gaps. We want these funds to be the difference between, oh, we're going to barely scrape it through and, oh, we're going to knock it out of the park. So these funds are really powerful because they're coming in sort of at the end of a project. But I think the other important part is because they're flexible and many other federal sources of funds require a local match. So and you can't match federal funds with other federal funds most of the time. So they're really, really powerful that way too. The organizations that receive these funds are able to actually sort of exponentially improve their fundraising, and they're bringing in more funds because they can demonstrate the commitment of these funds. So this is just basic math showing what that leverage impact looks like based on the last couple of years of numbers. And so those are numbers, but we really care about the people being helped. Here's a list of all of our accomplishments over the last 3 years, not including the fourth quarter of the current year or the year that we just finished. So we'll update these numbers within a few weeks, a couple of weeks. But you can see it's pretty amazing. And our one thing just to point out, like for instance, mortgage assistance, every dollar of affordable housing trust fund leverages anywhere from $10 to $20 of private investment. So that's also, you can kind of look at that 40 households and just that will give you a sense of the span of that impact. And for the new construction funding that we've provided, that's about a $10 leverage impact. So most of these uses, when you're serving very, very low income folks, you're leveraging $3, but it's also, we take into account, like I said, the in-kind resources. So that's makes it also valuable in a different way. And then who are the community partners? I think this is another really important point. As I said before, this money is very useful for leveraging additional money. And so there's kind of the secondary impact from affordable housing trust funds in that it really helps to build the capacity of the community partners. And they're the ones who they're local, they have the trust of the local community. People will walk through the doors of those agencies that wouldn't necessarily go to a government entity for help. But they're also able, they have their finger on the pulse better than a big governmental agency. So they can kind of sense that, hey, we have an emerging need here. Something's changing for the community. People need this, or they need it structured in a different way. And so I really, as the administrator of these funds, I really rely on these partnerships because this is what makes the money really work. This is what gives it legs. Oh,
think Alex froze. But that was the last slide. Let's see, I don't know if, Cody, you can take off the share for now until we get Alex back. Or is it my computer that, oh, there we go. Okay. Thank you. I did want to add to this conversation because this has come up from some of you and then also community members. This is for new real estate transfers and transactions, not existing homes with homeowners that have homes that are above $1 million. And also there was a question that's been posed by community members and other folks about why don't we just tax second homes for folks whose primary residence is not Santa Fe. And as much as I think we all like that idea, we are preempted by the state constitution that prevents us from making that something local that we can propose. So until the legislation or the constitutional requirements change at the state level, we can't do that at the local level. So the other question that I've gotten about raw land, this does not tax raw land if someone purchases land. So that was something that had come up before. And let's see, the other thing, I'm just trying to figure out, there was kind of questions about how this supports, I think the Realtors Association was asking, well, how does this actually support some of the programs? And it was very clear with Alex's presentation of the things that are very much supporting affordable housing initiatives, whether it's actual units, rehabilitation of units. If we think about what we have approved in the past with Lamplighter and Santa Fe Suites, that's providing units for folks that are transitioning out of homelessness or are of a certain limited income. So I think we all know from our experience that there's just this great need always, and we are kind of at the whim of a lot of different things, but also, you know, the last couple of years, we've been able to have a source that we can rely on, which is the 3 million. And that came from our general fund. And that was a commitment by the governing body. And we know in the past, we haven't been able to make that commitment for various reasons. So just wanted to add that's been helpful. And it would be great if we had a revenue source coming in that is higher than the 3 million and that we can rely on. So I will stop there. And I think, Alex, that was the last slide anyway. So we can go into questions. We do have some community members here that probably can answer some questions. We have Daniel Werwath. We also have, I see Nick from the Santa Fe New Mexican joining us as well. So just wanted to let you all know that. And I think that's it. I think we got Anne too online. So let's start with any questions or comments from commissioners. If you could raise your hand. All right. I see Commissioner Kenny Geyer.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you to the sponsors for putting this forward. We have a huge need and we can never meet the need with the current funding. So I love this overall idea. I have two questions. One is, why is the sale of land exempted? And the second question, if you want me to go ahead, is I wonder if it's worth considering doing a tiered approach. I've heard some of the comments. I know at your city council meeting, I think there were 52 out of 53 positive comments. So that's wonderful. I know that there have been some comments in the community about homes that are even a higher level should be taxed at a higher amount because we are so desperate for funding. And a lot of the people at that level are either paying cash or getting a hefty mortgage interest deduction. And so they are getting some support, or perhaps don't need the support from the public. And so I kind of wonder whether you want to do a tiered where you might take the amount between $1 million and 1.5 at 2%, 1.5 to 2 million at 3%, and over 2 million at 4%, something like that. It would be interesting to see what the analysis is. I think, my interest would be in seeing this proposal be more fair on one hand and raise more money on another hand. And I realize that the trade-off is just simplicity. So those are my two questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to, go ahead, Alex.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I did respond via email. The reason we can't at least have my understanding of how the city attorney explained it to me, we're not taxing the value of the property, we're taxing the transaction. And it's the same transaction, whether it's $1 million or $10 million. So we can't charge more for the same transaction.
So maybe my question wasn't clear, but right now it's a 3% on any amount of a sales price over $1 million. And I'm just talking about tweaking those amounts. So the excise tax on any amount between 1 million and 1.5 might be 2%. The excise tax then would graduate from after 2 like a marginal tax rate, like on our income tax. So between 1.5 and 2 million, it might be 3%. And any amount over the 2 million on the sales price would be 4%.
And
So taking
that's
the same idea, but just tiering it.
no, that's right. And it's the same, but it's it's the same answer, which is that the transaction doesn't change based on the value. It's the same transaction. We only have taxing authority as a municipality to tax the transaction because it's a product or a service. We cannot tax on land value. That's the county's authority. So the county could do it. County could do exactly that. The city can't. We can only tax the transaction as a single time process, and the process is the same regardless of the amount. So we couldn't say, well, you're buying a $10 million home, so you're going to pay more for the same transaction. We can't. It's the same transaction, so we have to charge the same amount. We're just charging for the privilege of doing business in the city of Santa Fe. We can't change it based on the value of the transaction. I know that sounds crazy. And that was the first thing I said to the city attorney, like, well, why wouldn't we tier it? And she said, we don't have the authority to do that.
That's helpful. Did that kind of answer two questions? Commissioner Kenny Guyer, was there a follow-up, or did you need clarification on some aspect of that?
I'm confused by the city attorney's response because it doesn't make logical sense to me, but I thank you for explaining that and for having explored it already. And then the question on the land, if a piece of land is sold in the city of Santa Fe, are you saying that has to go through the county? I didn't understand the land part of it. If a land is sold for 1.5 million, because somebody wants to develop a beautiful home there, why is that exempted in this proposal?
Commissioner, the reason it's exempted is that we don't know what the future value of the housing there is going to be. So it's, at least I think that's the reason, or whether it will even ever be developed or what it will be developed at. I think the idea is that it's much, and maybe this is more of a simplicity response, but once there's an actual home, an actual residential unit that's being transferred, it's much easier to know, because then at that point, you know what the value is. And I think there may be an issue with if we were to tax, and I don't know, I can ask the city attorney this question, but if we were taxing the sale of the undeveloped land, that may then exempt us from taxing each individual sale once the land is developed. And if the transaction, and always the cost of the vacant land is going to be way less than the cost of each developed home. So there may be something in there. I'll confirm with the city attorney, but it's very typical of these kinds of legislation that because I think she took the exemptions from I don't know if it was the county of LA, but another type of tax. So there is a rationale behind that. That's the best answer right there.
I
I'm
think,
speculating on to what it is, but yeah.
I think I'm also going to have Daniel Warwath share a little bit from the perspective from the Housing Action Coalition. They've been supportive of this initiative and they've done a lot of analysis around it. So Daniel, did you have some thoughts on that
Yes.
question?
Thank you, Councilor, Commissioners. Yeah, I think one of the reasons, just from the practical level of developing policy, was trying to tie housing to housing. And getting into land or commercial real estate starts to creep out into another sector that starts to lose a logical connection. Like a lot of this has to also go to voters, right, and be voted on. And so there's some considerations there. The other thing that I would cite is just that the exemption in the current proposal for land that has other affordability, homes that have other affordability restrictions attached to them. So like large parcels of land, most likely are going to end up most frequently in subdivision development, which is then subject to the homes program. And so taxing the land for affordable housing at transfer and then taxing again through an inclusionary requirement would sort of double the impact of that. And so to keep that clean and those two tracks separate, because that's, I think, an important thing to point out. In new construction, any subdivision that is subject to the homes program inclusionary zoning requirement is exempted from this transfer tax as well, because it's contributing directly by creating affordable housing units.
Thank you, Daniel. Commissioner Kenny Guyer, did you want to, did you have other questions or wanted, no, you're good? Okay.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good questions. Let's see. I think I saw Commissioner Brott, you had your hand up earlier.
Yeah, I do. If may I ask may I ask a series of questions?
Please.
First, just in connection to Alexandra's response regarding the $1 million threshold that we're taxing the transaction and not the value. How has the city attorney justified the $1 million threshold if we can't have other thresholds above it? If we can't have a $1.5 million threshold, how do we justify the $1 million threshold and not 800,000, for example?
I think, Madam Chair, Commissioner Brott, I think that's a great question. And the answer is a little bit squishy. I think it was felt at the time that we were putting the legislation together that the $1 million threshold was enough over the median priced home in the city of Santa Fe that it would have the intended impact, which is to affect, I mean, it's not that huge of effect, but that the very higher income buyers would be the ones paying it. And so we wouldn't get too close to, well, but that if that's the median, then that's kind of what the average buyer is paying, which, as we know, is the median home price is way above the ability of the median income earner to afford. So it's a little, but it is a little squishy. And Madam Chair, if I could, I just thought of an analogy that might help explain the reason we can't do the tiered amounts. If it would be as if every time you went, we don't pay GRT on groceries anymore, but let's say we still did. If you were paying a different rate of GRT on your groceries, depending on how many groceries you bought. So if you only paid $50 in groceries, you paid 8%. And if you bought $200 of groceries, you paid 10%. Like that wouldn't make any sense, right? Because it's the same transaction. It's just that you're buying more groceries. So that's kind of where that rationale comes from, because we're taxing it's the same, it has to be the same rate on the transaction. And it's just how big the transaction is what changes the amount, not the rate of the tax, if that makes sense.
Following that line, I mean, I have to say, I'm still unclear and a little unconvinced, just that the argument of we can't have different thresholds going up, but we can have different thresholds going down. We cannot include below $1 million transactions, but we can include above $1 million. So just in terms of my own thought process in looking at this, within that, I just come out and say, I think that this is an excellent effort. I really appreciate the fact that this legislation was proposed. There's a profound need in the city. The city clearly needs more and varied streams of revenue. So I want you to know that I really support this type of legislation. Within that, just looking at the other types of revenue generating possibilities, did your office, Alexandra, look at documentation fees, linkage fees, mill levies, and the like, that other possibilities that might also have a bigger tax base and potentially generate more revenue?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Broad, that's an excellent question. I mean, that kind of work has always been on our back burner. I don't have that expertise in my office. So over the years, we've worked with our finance team to try to figure out, is there any low-hanging fruit we're leaving on the table that we could put to use sooner than later. So I would say, like, it's a constant conversation, but I haven't really had the capacity to pursue a lot of the other sources. And this particular mechanism is so clear cut, and it's so understandable to the community. The community gets to vote on it, so if everyone going to the polls in November is like, I think it's a terrible idea, at least they understand what they're voting on. I think that's important. Like, nobody knows how mill levies work except for my father-in-law, who knows more about industrial revenue bonds than anybody walking the face of the earth. But like, that's a pretty specific knowledge base. And so we just haven't really been able to develop those other sources as well.
Fair enough.
And I think I would add, there's different tools in the toolbox that we need to use. And we've noticed there's, different initiatives or actions that we've taken that has helped, but it's really hasn't moved the needle on really supporting affordable housing at a larger scale. And I would also add that the Housing Action Coalition presented I want to say it was a year ago, Daniel, or maybe it was 2 already, about different options of things the city could do to support affordable housing. And some were like low-hanging fruit, some were takes a little bit more work. And there was kind of just a different short-term, long-term ideas and possibilities. And I think some of them we've taken on, but not to the extent of something like this. And so I guess I would want Daniel to also weigh in about this, because what are the other options? Yes, there's other options, and this seemed, like Alex said, more clear-cut for the voter than some of the other more complex financial tools. So I don't know, Daniel, did you want to maybe add to that?
Sure. Thank you, Councilor, Commissioners. I would say, in the work we did in, I guess that was late 2020 that we produced the report about ways to fund the trust fund. We did look at a really broad range, and there are some other options. The challenge becomes that, all those options need political will to move forward. And so I would, from a technical point of view, from a practitioner point of view, I would say this shouldn't be a one and done. We should still explore other ways to diversify funding for the trust fund. And so I wouldn't expect this to be the only thing pursued. The other thing that I would just point out, right, the main weakness that we highlighted, I think, in our report of this funding approach is that it does fluctuate with the market, right? And so thinking about things that don't fluctuate with real estate market changes are really important, because there's always the perennial challenge. And part of the challenge why we need more diverse sources is right now we're relying on essentially GRT, general fund money, to pay for this, right? And so a lot of times when there's no GRT are when we need to do housing assistance, right? And so really looking at diversifying sources beyond market-based sources, I think, is a good idea. I think there's, there's a definitely political third rail in Santa Fe of saying things like, we're going to raise everybody's property taxes, right? And especially when you look at the population of people who are extremely financially burdened right now, living in Santa Fe, property tax increases would have a negative impact there. We have a completely inelastic rental market. Increase in property taxes would absolutely be passed on to consumers. So I think in those contexts, this is really trying to tie solutions to one of the big drivers of the problem right now, which is a huge influx of people with considerable wealth beyond that of local wage earners, right? And just to reflect back too on your question about the $1 million threshold, on some level, that's a political number, right? Because this is a referendum and you have to pick a number. The rough equivalent of that is affordability at around 300% of median income. That's $1 million home. You have to be 300% of the median income to afford that. And so that is a level that is, meant to exclude most locals. I think there are approximately about 3,000 households who could, using financing, afford $1 million home in the city of Santa Fe. And of those, 85% are currently homeowners, right? So this is broadly designed to try and capture the impact that people with capital from outside our community, that impact on our housing market and the way that it is effectively pulling housing costs away from local wages.
Thank you, Daniel. Commissioner Brott, you still have the floor. Do you have additional questions?
Not at this time, no. I have a few other questions. Maybe can ask them after everybody else has a chance to ask questions too.
Great, thank you. All right. Any other commissioners have questions, comments? Commissioner Padilla.
Madam Chair, thank you. I've got a question just for my clarification. If I am purchasing a plot of land to build on in a subdivision, and there is no tax on that purchase, correct? I build the house. I build a house as a spec. That house is built, and I can build it for total cost is 1.1 million. Now I build it to live in, not a spec. There's no charge, there's no excise tax to me, correct? The minute I go to sell it at 1.5 to make a little bit of a profit, that buyer is who feels the impact of this legislation. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now I buy a tract of land in a subdivision that has approved, is approved for it's got affordable housing as part of the subdivision. It was developed. I go in, I buy that plot of land. I build it. The house is valued at 1.1 million when I'm ready to sell it. Now, it wasn't one of the affordable lots. Is my buyer going to be charged the excise tax of the 100,000 above 1.1 million? I mean, $1 million in a subdivision that was approved with affordable housing as a part of its approval?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Padilla, so that subdivision, if this lot is part of a subdivision, the subdivision has already complied with the affordable housing requirement. So, I mean, it's unlikely that one lot would be sold undeveloped to a specific individual buyer or builder. So it's probably not a scenario that would come up a lot, but it is, that project as a whole has already provided the affordable housing that it's obligated to provide.
Understood, but that developer goes in, buys that lot, develops the lot with a single family residence, and that residence can sell for, it's just hypothetical, sells for $1.1 million. Is the buyer going to be charged this excise tax on the $100,000 above $1 million?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Padilla, I'm trying to think, because I think it would become a different, I'm not entirely sure from a legal perspective, but I believe so the developer who subdivided the whole project, they've complied.
Correct.
They've sold price restricted lots, or maybe they donated them to Habitat or whatever. So they've taken care of their affordability requirement as a whole. If they then sell one lot to someone else, that transfer, I don't believe would get taxed. But if that other person built a single home and then sold it, it may sort of excerpt it from the rest of the project, because now it's become like an individual lot. And I just don't even know like when that would happen, but some of the high-end subdivisions, then each lot gets sold individually to a builder after that subdivision has complied with the ordinance. So that's a really good question. And I'm gonna write down that scenario to get our city attorney to talk about it.
Yeah, it was just a hypothetical,
It's
and
a good
probably the
question. though. It is a good question.
probably the subdivisions that have got, there are subdivisions that, and we've seen projects that say, hey, we're gonna do the affordable housing we're gonna meet the affordable housing requirements, et cetera. And lots could sell, houses could be built on a property. So that was a question. So another question that I've got, or just is the $1 million was the target that was focused. This is a problem that is citywide. Is there a reason why anything above the area median income that is sold is not taxed? In essence, everybody should bear the burden of helping affordable housing in Santa Fe. Why is it $1 million plus that was the target? If it's a citywide problem that we know we have, why aren't we addressing the problem citywide? And everybody step up. Now, is it different tiers? Rather than the 3%, is it lower? But I mean, if this is a citywide problem, then it's like the community should step up to support this affordable housing.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Padilla, so are you suggesting that instead of using a number for the threshold of when the excise tax applies, you would base it on the median value, anything above the median value?
I mean, was that thought about?
I don't know if it was thought about. I know that from a logistic perspective, because that number changes every quarter, it would be really, really tricky to keep adjusting it all the time. I also think that it's just hitting a little close to home in terms of local folks feeling like, hey, that's my income when you get around the median priced home. Not a lot of local folks, but some certainly are making those kinds of salaries. And so I think the idea was that $1 million felt out of reach for local folks. And I don't really know how else to put it other than that.
Yeah. So the last comment would be, a lot of our community that is struggling with housing and being able to afford housing are very active in that $1 million plus market. That they are the laborers, they are the framers, they are the drywall people, the painters, I mean, there's a lot of them there. If this excise tax slows that market down, the unintended consequences could be significant to where that income or that job is no longer there, or it's greatly reduced. The other thing is just the sales. I mean, on the real estate side, I mean, what's that going to do to, our colleagues that are realtors, that survive that could be impacted by that. Just general questions. I know everybody doesn't agree with that, but it's just thought. I mean, the workforce could be impacted. And I deal with that workforce every day. You know, for it to slow down when COVID first started, it was a significant impact to the workforce. They struggled. And, you know, I'd hate to see it be negative and be a unintended consequences of this excise tax. That's all I have. It was just a comment. I'm not saying that I don't support this. I'm just throwing that out there for discussion.
One thing I would say is that I think that the unintended consequence of our workforce not being able to live here has way more larger repercussions of our economy, of housing, building housing. The construction industry has way more serious negative repercussions than what a potential tax could do. You know, we don't know what a person would do if they said, oh, this particular amount of money, this is untenable for me, but buying over $1 million home and I'm not going to end up purchasing it. Well, there may be situations like that, but I think we heard from folks during public comment that there were people testifying saying that I did buy a home that was over $1 million, and I would have been happy to contribute that amount, the excise tax that would have been generated if my home would have been taxed when I purchased it. So I think there's different points of view.
Always.
There may be some, folks that you think might not purchase for that sheer reason, but I think what we've seen it in other places, and maybe Daniel Warwath has examples, but other cities where there are taxes of this kind, and people of a certain income do not flinch. I don't know if Alex wanted to share, or even Daniel, any kind of perspectives on that.
Madam Chair, I'll add just something and then I'll turn it over to Daniel too. I think we have been imposing the cost of our high value real estate market on the production side up to this point. So anyone building new housing, it has to comply with inclusionary zoning, and they're taking the hit. So if you were talking to a group of the home builders, they would say, hey, let's spread it out a little bit so that it is actually more, this is a diversification of the impact, so to speak. But I think when we were able to allow rental developers to pay the in lieu fee, that did more for that population of the workforce, that part of the workforce, than this could possibly suppress, I think. In other words, we weren't having any multifamily development. So all of those employees were able to get employed in that industry after we were able to open up the market to rental development. So there's, there is no clear-cut perfect answer. It's always going to be a balancing act. But I think that the intent is that this balances it the most fairly. I don't know, Daniel, did you have anything to add?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. I think, there's some data we could look at here that helps us understand this. So in 2018, about $180 million homes sold. Last year, 407 sold. So it's kind of a booming market if you think about it that way. So I'm not so worried about it shrinking. I don't know that shrinking would be a bad thing. I think we have a lot of construction capacity tied up in high-end home building here. I'd love to see it shift to small scale subdivision development, working class housing. So I think the potential downsides are sort of small in compared to the potential benefits. One of the testimonies from the other night, right? One of my good friends, a board member, builds houses, and he put it this way: it's like, when you're building houses over $1 million, the tax on a $1.5 million house would be about $15,000, right? And he's like, that's an appliance upgrade, a decision someone makes sometimes in a matter of minutes, right? And I don't think it breaks the deal on something at this price point, right? And I think that's the point we get to, right? Like, a realtor commission on a $1.5 million house is $90,000, right? Like, there's all these fees that are already built into home buying. That, to me, when you're at that level of purchase power, something when we're talking about $3,000 per hundred, I don't think it necessarily is going to shrink the amount of $1 million home sales. I also would just say from a like equity point of view, like shrinking $1 million home sales in this town would not be a bad thing. It was 45% of the real estate market last year in Santa Fe were homes over $1 million. So to me, that's like an alarming statistic, given that there's only 3,000 households in Santa Fe that can afford that based on income. So to me, it's just about trying to retune what the systems we're creating to try and support working class and affordable housing. And I think we've got to do more too, right? I think we need to think about land use changes. Our entire zoning code's designed to cater to $1 million home building set. And I know a lot of people make their money off that, but it's not serving the community anymore. It's not trickling down in the way, because those people can't afford to live here on those salaries. And if we don't fix that, it becomes a preemptive problem that, you know, the job, it doesn't matter if there's a job there if you don't have a house.
Thank you both. Commissioner Padilla, did you have any follow-up questions or clarifications?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
We appreciate your perspectives. I think there's, you know, there are some unknowns, but I also think that the analysis shows the 4.5 million generation that we need would really support our community in so many different ways.
Thank you.
Okay, so there are other commissioners we haven't heard from. Are there any folks that want to share perspectives or have any questions? No, I see a no. Okay. We are getting close to time. I have to run to City Hall for another meeting, but that doesn't mean we have to end now. I'm just curious if there was any other questions that commissioners had as a follow-up to our conversation before we accept a motion.
No, I have one more question, Madam Chair, if no one else has a question.
Sure, Commissioner Pratt.
It's you know, it's related to the excise tax, but separate in the sense that it's about, you know, raising money for the trust fund, which is a very laudable goal. The way I see housing in Santa Fe, I see this as really a drop in the bucket. It's a really meaningful move in the right direction, but we have, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars of equity that we need to invest collectively to really make a change in terms of the prices that people are paying, in terms of rent, in terms of their down payments. So my hope is over time that the city council, this body and others can find ways to create incentives for developers to build more homes, for us to find ways for there to be multiple revenue streams so this trust fund can be really built out. One of the ways is already being done in Albuquerque, and that's like what is it, a general housing bond, I think they call it, obligation bond rather. And my question is, and I'm not sure who the right person, Alexandra, you might be the best place to answer this, is there any issue in terms of us, the city council requiring at some point that, you know, a housing bond go in front of voters every 2 years, for example, or any other limitations on making it periodic so that we can count on funding 2 years, 3 years, or whatever it might be?
Oops.
Can you see us or hear us, Alex?
I can. I'm sorry. I just dropped something on top of my keyboard and everything went blank. Jeez.
I mean, I could probably answer part of that. We have explored a geo bond like Albuquerque, and we are able to do that for the city of Santa Fe. And it's not for lack of wanting. Maybe it's lack of capacity. I'm not sure. Maybe Alex can expound upon that.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Commissioner Brott, I believe that there's kind of a complicated timing issue with the geo bonds. And so, and there's a couple different steps involved. And I think that it is, that has probably been the clearest item on the back burner that I was mentioning earlier because Albuquerque's done it and it's pretty straightforward and there's a lot of support for it. So I would expect that that would be a logical next step as well.
That was one of the things that the coalition had talked about. So Daniel, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think the key part of that is, yes, the Go Bond is a great way to do that. Albuquerque's been really successful. It's more limited in what it can be deployed for. So like that, the eligible uses. So some of the things that we currently do with the trust fund, some of the things that we could do with revenues from this excise tax, those funds are more flexible. Typically, Go Bond money is more limited to infrastructure development and things like that. So it doesn't do as much stuff. And then it's subject to bond capacity and other things. And so you can't really compel it to be put in front of the voters every 2 years. It's something that would need individual authorization each time. And I think even Albuquerque, who has a very reliable every 2-year cycle over the last about 16 years, I think skipped a couple years during the pandemic. And so that's the challenge there. It does require reoccurring political will to appear on the ballot.
Thanks for that. I didn't realize
Thank
that.
you.
Any other questions, Commissioner Brock?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions or comments from commissioners? All
For a
right,
motion,
we're ready for a motion.
I move the commission recommends to the city council forwarding the excise tax to the November election.
Second,
All right, we have a motion and second. Any other discussion? Commissioner Kenny Guyer?
I'll be voting yes, but I just wanted to add the comment that I would have liked to see a tiered system if it were possible through the city attorney. And I would have liked to have seen land sold to individuals considered, since if you're transferring land or selling land over $1 million, presumably to buy a house, that is a pretty upper category. But perfection is the enemy of the good. And I stand ready to vote.
Thank you for
That
that.
comment.
Thank you. Any other comments before we vote? Seeing none, Tony, can we get a roll call, please?
Madam Chair, Fierro,
Yes.
Commissioner Brock,
Yes.
Commissioner Padilla,
Yes.
Commissioner Torres,
yes.
Commissioner Hughes,
Yes,
Commissioner Kenny Guyer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Excellent. Motion passes. Thank you all. Did we get everybody? Just want to note that Commissioner Watkins had technical difficulties and so was with us, but could not join us in the vote. All right, so moving on our agenda, we have matters from staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add, I really appreciate these questions because these are reasonable and well thought through and articulate. And these are the questions that we need to better understand. And I've written down a few things that I need clarification on. And so thank you for helping us make this better. And other than that, Cody, do you have any other item from staff?
No matters for me. Thank you.
All right, anything from Tony?
None for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Matters from the commission. Matters, I see Commissioner Hughes.
yes, thanks, Chair. I'd like to see an update in a subsequent meeting on the Alto Street project. I haven't seen any movement on that. I'm just curious if we could find out what's going on.
Did you say Alto Street?
Yes,
Okay, good to know. Thank you. We can provide you with that later.
I do have an update. So I can provide a quick update if we have time for that.
up to the chair.
I don't have time.
Let's do it next month.
Okay, that works. Thank you. Okay, any other matters from our commissioners? Commissioner Torres?
I recall, the next meeting date on, that was written here is wrong. It says the 16th and it's supposed to be the 23rd, right?
Let's see. In
Did
the
we
agenda,
change
you
it?
mean? That is
Third
correct.
Wednesday, the 16th.
So our regular meeting, it was normally the 16th, like you said, but it has been moved. Our next meeting will be on August 23rd. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
We'll make sure to make a note of that. Thank you.
That was a confusing communique.
It was. I was confused too, Commissioner Padilla, if that makes you feel better. I wrote, Cody, please clarify because I'm really confused what's happening. So yes, we're moving our meeting to August 23rd. Anything else from the commissioners? No? All right, I don't have anything. So yes, our next meeting will be Wednesday, August 23rd, and we are adjourned. Hope you all are enjoying the hot weather. Take care.
Bye-bye.